Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Learning from QVisits webinar. It's the first of 3, so really delighted you could join us at a lunchtime session and on a Friday as well. So thank you ever so much for coming along. I'm going to do some quick introductions. Hang on a second. Okay, so my name's Emma Adams. I have led the QVisits programme with Pete, who I'll introduce in a second. So we've, over the last 3 years, taken people to various places within the Q community. Some of you attending may well have come along, and I hope you have. So today there will be me, and then there will be Pete Dudgeon, who's my QVisits provider, who'll be leading the session. And then we're delighted that we've got Dr. Helen Krimlisk from Sheffield Health and Social Care Trust. And we've also got Richard Hay, who's an independent consultant, business consultant. And both of those have hosted visits in the past. So we're delighted they're joining us for the day. So in terms of how we're running the session, so we'd appreciate it if you're on mute while we present the core material. The chat's open all the way through, so please post any questions that you have on the chat, and we'll be monitoring that between us. And at the end of each section, if you want to speak, raise your hand. So you should be able to use that facility on Zoom, but if not, ask us in the chat and we'll help you. And if there's any questions you've got, then we'll monitor them and send them through the chair at the time. If your tech fails, don't worry, because we are recording. So we can always catch up on that later. And if you feel like you'd like to contribute to the discussion via Twitter, then they're the two, the QVisits hashtag, and then the handle of @theQcommunity that you can use. And just to say, don't worry if somebody interrupts or comes in. We're all used to that now, aren't we? So yeah, just we will pay no attention whatsoever. So I hope you have a really good session. Pete's going to take us through now how the session will run. And between the two of us, we'll sort of swap back and forwards in terms of presenting the material. So lovely to see you all. I'm going to hand over to Pete now.
Yes, hi, great to see you all. It's fantastic that we've got so many people here, and I'm sure there'll be some joining us as we speak. So we're going to do a few introductions and get you warmed up a little bit for the session in a second. And then I'm going to talk you through a brief overview of the sort of places that we visited and the aspects of improvement that people were leading on, that those hosts were leading on in those sessions, just to give you a flavour if you've not been to all of the visits, what we experienced. And then we're going to go into what's your experience. So regardless of whether you've been on a Q visit before, what have you learned from the visits, and what can you share? And what can you share from going to other areas of your organisation or anywhere you've visited? And then we're going to go on, as Emma was talking about, to interview Helen and Richard, and that's the opportunity to pose some questions to them. We'll do a bit of a Q&A style interview. Then we'll have a breakout around, so what now what? So what are the implications of what you've been discussing with each other and what you've heard from ourselves and from Richard and Helen. And then we'll signpost you to some future webinars, and then we'll close up just asking for a little bit of brief feedback from you. So that's the flow of the session. Okay, but to get us warmed up, we're going to experiment with using the annotate feature of Zoom. And with this bizarre squirrel scale, we just want to see how you're feeling today. So what we're going to ask you to do is go up to the top of the screen. You should see something called View Options, and there should be an option called Annotate. And within that, you can put a shape or an arrow to say how you're feeling. So if I'm feeling like this squirrel with a Halloween pumpkin on its head, wanting to disappear, I'll put that around about a 4. That's where I am. So feel free to mark up as you see fit. Let's just spend 30 seconds just doing that, seeing how people feel. That's quite a lot for 8s, which is good. I haven't felt an 8 in a while, I must admit. I think if you called me about 8 o'clock this morning, I'd definitely been a 5. Okay, quite a lot of votes for 8. That's really good to see. A few 6s. We're going to have to get those arms unfolded as we move forward in this session. Great. So I'm going to move on. So same using the annotate function. You let us know whereabouts you are. Put a little squiggle or a symbol in the country just to see where we've got people coming from. Well, I've got quite a few from London or around London. So I wish my geography was better. Is that Exeter or a bit further down? Looks like somebody's in a cruise on the North Sea, I think. I should show where I am, shouldn't I? Okay, so everybody I think is from England, apart from our seafaring person. I'm not sure where they're from. Okay, so what we're going to do now, thanks for doing that, is we're going to hear from you in the chat about whether you have been on a visit before. So if you'd like to just pop in the chat, just say I am whoever you are. So I'm Peter and I've been on a lot of different visits. So if you could just say I am whoever and say if you've been on any visits or if you have been on visits, what visits you've been to, that'd be great. So we're going to use that information when we do some of the breakout sessions. So if you could let us know if you've been on any visits before in the chat, that would be really helpful. Thank you. And if you're not familiar with the chat function, which I think most of you probably will have been since we've been virtually online for so long. But if you don't know, please do give us a shout. Looks like we've got a bit of a mixture coming through. People have been on visits before, people who haven't. Okay, so looking at that, we've got a real mixture of people who've been on visits before and those who haven't. So this is great because it will give you the opportunity of speaking to people who have been on those visits and who've hosted visits as well as we go through the session. So thanks very much for doing that. I do appreciate it. So let's just give you an overview of some of the organisations we've been to. I'm not going to pause on any for too long, but just to say we've now visited 25 organisations, over 200 Q members have attended those different organisations, and they've fed back in a number of different ways through video blogs and sharing and learning, lots of different ways. And just to give you a flavour of the sort of things that we've covered in all those different organisations, we've covered different lean organisations using Agile, Appreciative Inquiry approaches, experience-based co-design, done a lot of work with Cambridge University and Engineering Better Care through a Q visit program, behavioural insights, relational leadership, agile, microsystems approach at Sheffield. So there's And there's just too many to mention them all. But I just wanted to say that a lot of these organisations all have blended these different approaches, and part of the interest is in how they've done that. So hopefully that's just give you a flavour and some of the logos there, some of the places we've been.
Okay, so it's over to me. So I'm going to give us a little bit of an overview of some of the learning that we've picked up as hosts. So we've been really lucky to have a great job, and we've gone to over 25 organisations and been able to watch and listen and learn alongside Q members and listen to some of the conversations that have been had. So what we've done is we've had a look at all of the places we've been to and done some reflection on the things that have struck us as some of the learning we've noticed. But we're really acutely aware that if you've gone to visits yourself, you will have your own learning and you might want to share that with people. So there's a chance to do that during the day. And then the other thing is you may have learning that you've got from other places you've gone outside of the Q community. It may be that you've gone to different organisations or different parts of your own organisation that have given you a bit of insight. So we feel there is a really strong theme in virtually every visit we did around relational leadership, but some of the organisations to the right of the slide are where we picked that feeling up most. And we felt that, really crucial to improvement was the relationships that we need to develop as we go along the way. And our learning fell into 4 main themes: a theme around yourself and how you change yourself, a theme around how you lead visibly, how you communicate with others, and how you develop ownership through the change. So I'm going to take us through each one. So in terms of our theme around change yourself, it's really important that we think about how we relate to others and how that really impacts our chances of success when we're improving systems and processes. So these were the visits that we undertook, and you'll hear from Helen and from Richard later on in the session about those particular visits to Sheffield and GSK. But what we saw is we saw a real emphasis on understanding how you yourself need to develop and change if you're going to expect others to develop and change as well. So at GSK, they did a lot of work around developing a system, an operating system that absolutely incorporated organizational development within it. And you'll see in the left-hand corner a photograph of their change model, which very much has you yourself in the middle of it, and what's your attitude to change before you work with the team and with your organization, and how you work through a change cycle. We also saw in the same place a real strong emphasis in a future strategy group with a small group of people about daily, quite rigorous feedback on how they were developing and how they were becoming leaders. And then the other thing we saw particularly, and Helen will give us a lot more detail, is around how leaders pay attention to their own role in the change and how they hold certainty, uncertainty, what's their gestures and their responses. And we also saw at WPP and the Behavioural Insights team, a lot of information about what it is that influences us, leads us and affects us. So to summarise, and I do apologise if this is too brief, but to summarise, the things we really noticed in these visits were around a real focus on self-development and that being essential to change, a focus on really noticing yourself and the gestures and the responses you make and how you actively listen. And then equally, an understanding of your own biases and how that might be influencing the way you're working. So to move on to the next theme, we picked this up around working in different places, but really giving consideration to the change that's being made or the improvement that's being made, but who owns that and who participates in that. So where we went was we went to Northumbria Healthcare Trust. We also went to a software firm called Maiden in Bath, and we had a session on systems thinking and design thinking with the Royal Academy of Engineering. And what we saw was a large use of experience-based co-design in Northumbria. So we were exposed to emotional mapping as a technique of understanding people's experience of a change. And we were also shown how observation really leads the way they take on improvement. At Maiden, we were introduced to agile approach and the use of user stories. And the user stories were used to design the product and really lead the product so that it's retained its user-centric approach. And one of the things they did was have almost proxy users in their product owners. And then in Cambridge, we saw an approach to design thinking and how that can help to get us to develop an understanding of people's experience through simulation. So the things we noticed is there were different approaches used in different places around building people into solutions. There was a sort of design with people approach, and then there was a design for people, I mean, almost in a proxy way, and then there was a design around engineering designed behaviors. But central to this was you know, who's the change for? How much do they own it? How much are they involved? And how much are they leading that change? And we also looked at, in those different organisations, how close that was to those people most affected by it. And we think this is really important for considering how you're leading. It's what's your relationship to the people for who the improvement or the change matters most. The next thing we saw was around the importance of communicating well. And this is not just about listening well and expressing yourself. It's about how do you build some powerful routines and habits that mean that that can happen. We saw this almost everywhere, but we particularly saw this strong in lean organisations. And we also saw this very strong in Sheffield Microsystems Academy and GSK. So what we saw was not just an emphasis on communicating, but how you communicate. So how you use daily huddles and communication tools, how you use visual management. We saw very effective problem solving. We saw the use of meeting roles, and we saw the use of carefully crafted agendas that really thought through why it was that people were coming together and what they were trying to achieve. So in terms of the things that we noticed that like I've said, there's an importance around building a communication routine. So that's not just haphazard, that there is some purpose to that, and purposefulness, hard to say, to the way you come together. And a collective responsibility through using things like meeting roles and agenda setting, which meant that seriously understanding how people communicate together and how they can participate in an equal way. And then using visual management to make that communication even richer. And what we found is those kind of attempts and strategies and habits led to a much marked improvement in the way the working environment felt, in that we felt a sense of calmness, a same sense of effectiveness, but a sense of equity in terms of the way people were contributing. And then finally, the fourth area that we saw was around the importance of leading visibly in change. And that's not just as a structural leader, but in terms of working and leading with others. And we found that those that were visible and role model learning improvement were the most effective. So the visits where we picked up quite a strong sense of this are listed here. And what we saw was a consistency of leadership approach, even when leaders change, which sounds interesting. So there was a handover, particularly in TZESC and WEA, of when one leader left and another leader came, that consistency continued. And so there was a sense of the values and the principles continuing through leadership, even though leadership, the leaders themselves might alter. And then equally, we saw a real visibility of leaders in the workplace, actually coming right down to the shop floor and making sure they saw what was happening and what was going on. And then particularly in the both Sheffield visits that we did, a real focus on working together as a team, thinking about the relational things that are going on in improvement, not just the technical things. And then in Prostate Cancer UK, a real desire to put in Appreciative Inquiry as the way in which they led their improvement across their organisation. So the things that we noticed or we learned were around the leader as a coach, taking that leadership, not just at executive level, but living that leadership in terms of responding to when things go wrong, responding to changes, and actually working as a coach with the people around them. And then we also saw and noticed the value of appreciation. So what does it take as a leader to inquire in an assets-based way, to look for the good, and to build a sort of shared dream? And then finally, the thing we saw was around leader as a coach. At the Gemba, sorry, leader there in the front line, and how they were sort of working and responding with the teams on the problems that they were addressing. So in summary, that's a really quick canter through the things that we picked up as hosts. And you'll have had your own insights as well. And also we want to give you an opportunity to learn from other people. So I know some of you are new Q members, some of you have been around quite a while. And I think there's an opportunity now for us to come together and see if we can pick up some of those learning points and take them and think, is there anything that we could add to that or that we've seen elsewhere? So what we're going to do now is we're going to take you through a breakout session. Sarah's going to kindly divide you up into breakouts. And what we'd like you to do in that sort of session is to think about the core themes that I've just sort of ran through. Did they resonate with you? Did they remind you of anything? What learning did you take away if you did attend a Q visit, or if you've gone somewhere else that's of note? And is there anything that you'd like to share with others? So we're going to put you into those groups, but we'd like you, before you come back, to nominate someone who could feed back to the group. Okay, so I'm going to ask Sarah if she's ready. Are you ready, Sarah? Yep. If you don't mind, to send people off into a breakout group, and we will bring you back promptly after 20 minutes. Please use the chat as well if there's anything you wanted to comment on this point. Okay, thanks, Sarah. Would you mind doing that for us?
Yep. Hey. Hey. Okay. How did you not put me in a room? Oh, I'm just going to pause the recording.
Okay. Just waiting for a few more to come back, I think. Okay, I think we've got everybody back. I'm not sure how many breakout groups we had, but what we'll do is we'll spend a bit of time providing some feedback. And I'm going to kick off with the group that I started, and then I'll go around and see if we can get a representative from each of the breakout groups, see if we can do that in the time that we've got. So we had a really good discussion linking to what Emma was describing, particularly around Appreciative Inquiry is where we focused on in the end, because we talked about different levels of maturity in different parts of the system in terms of understanding the model for improvement, etc., and where do you start from scratch. And we were talking about the importance of understanding stakeholder needs and starting from that perspective. But then Jenny in our group mentioned that appreciative inquiry can often be a good place to start in those situations, particularly if you've got a situation where people are feeling low and demoralized and they want something to focus on as a group. And that appreciative inquiry can give you that sort of asset-based, positive to look at together collectively that we saw when we went to Prostate Cancer UK. So that was something that we drew on from what Emma was talking about. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to leave it there from our group and just invite others. So we did have a few people who volunteered coming up to the session to provide some feedback. So perhaps if we go to their groups first. So let's start with Seema. Seema, can you hear us? I know we can.
Yeah, I can. I'm sorry if it's a bit noisy here. And Alex is on our group as well and was taking notes, so he's going to chip in if I forget anything. Priya was just telling us how we were talking about Q visits, but also visits to other organisations that might not necessarily have been through Q, and how energizing it is, and having that headspace to be able to see how a different organisation works and what kind of approach they use and the headspace that gives you. So that was just a really helpful way of considering, you know, how sad it is that we're not doing those at the moment, but hopefully, you know, we will do in the future. We talked quite a lot in our group about communication being something that we saw on our visits, whether they were with Q or elsewhere, and how the use, the sort of intelligent and with a small and big I use of information so that people know what's going on is something perhaps that we could do better in particularly healthcare organisations, and sort of thinking about the GSK and also Unipart as well, and how they keep their information so current in terms of what's going on and what people need to know. I talked a little bit about my reflections on going to GSK all those years ago, and how change starting with me was a really important message that I'm still sort of working on in terms of it's something really actionable to start with yourself in an organisation that's massive, and to know that those small changes will down the line have some sort of impact. I really liked Vicky was talking about her visit. It was we went international, so Vicky went to Canterbury as part of her Generation Q offer, and just some of the ways of them having a good meeting was really interesting. So they work as a system. They try and leave their baggage at the door physically. So any of the words we might hear in meetings, like, oh, well, who's going to pay for that, and actually is that commissioned, those sort of phrases are phrases that are left at the door so people can have a good meeting. So there's something about how can you organise a good meeting. Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything else if we've got time.
I think you've summarised that beautifully. You had everything that I'd noted down, so nothing to add.
Thank you, Seema. Thank you, Alex. So Rotimi, were you in a different group? Have you got some things you'd like to feedback? You're on mute, by the way.
Yes, Sandra will be giving a feedback for us. I think we had a good meeting. Sandra, it's okay.
I am on mute. Yeah, okay. So I kind of said, happy to be called Sandra, which most people find easier to pronounce. All right, my group, we were 4. So 3 people had been on a Q visit, and for the life of me, I haven't managed to get on one. Every time I tried, something happened. I couldn't. So it was good hearing from those who had been. But then I went to an event, which I fed back on as well. So the things that the people who had been, we had people who had visited Nissan, GSK, and yeah, some other things I believe. So there was a sense of shared understanding and common aims. And I think this really resonated with every one of us. You know, people felt like it was actually like a lean process as well, because you didn't spend all that time trying to explain what you mean, who you are, and all that. You know, I think Helen said it was good having people that got it, you know? You kind of bought time by that. So when you started, you felt like these are people who were thinking like me, who knew where I'm coming from. So that came out really clearly. Then there was something about the welcome that was received, the atmosphere in the place where, especially Rotimi has said about visiting Nissan, the atmosphere, the warm welcome. And there was that sense of cohesion between members of staff. It didn't matter who came to you. Everybody kind of felt, it felt as though everybody had the same agenda to make you feel welcome. And that was, you know, really great. Then there was also the thing around making the staff in the place, making them comfortable even whilst they're at their job. There was this sense of, even though we were doing repeated tasks, however, it was done in such a way that people could distress, as it were. So you didn't have to spend too long. Somebody else came in, and you know, the system just, you know, kind of worked like a conveyor belt system, which Rotimi felt was great. And Donna told us about the leadership visibility. And she was like, it's not like I didn't know this thing, but I just completely forgot. So going on that visit just brought it back. You know, I had everything in my head, but it was about making other people see. And people talked a lot about the use of imagery being very powerful, the use of having the whiteboard and just dumping everything on there so that it became very visible to people. And then, of course, I kind of talked about, you know, my event, which I attended in Scotland, the richness of the community, you know, being in an environment where you had people from, you know, various side of, or various sectors or various provisions in terms of healthcare and otherwise. And yet we were all kind of faced with the same problem. And it was very reassuring to know that actually, irrespective of wherever you came from, everybody really, you know, was facing the same thing. And just hearing people, you know, kind of talking about the same thing and us all trying to problem solve together was very powerful for me. So the richness of the Q community, that was it for me.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So I'm conscious of time. We want to get as much feedback from as many people as possibly can. So what we're going to do is, if you have not managed to speak yet, your group hasn't managed to speak, if you could summarize any key points in the chat facility either now or as we move through the rest of the webinar, that'd be great. And we'll make sure that the chat text is available for people as a resource. What I'm going to do now is move us on to having a chat with Helen and Richard. So I'm going to ask each to introduce themselves, just say what their role is and what the nature of the Q visit that they hosted was, and then we're going to get into a bit of a Q&A. So be thinking if there are any questions you'd like to ask the hosts. So Helen, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, hi, Pete. I'm Helen Krimlisk. I'm a Deputy Medical Director at Sheffield Health and Social Care Trust and a consultant psychiatrist by background. And the visit that we hosted was place-based, if you like. So we recognised that there were a number of us in Sheffield who had undertaken work with the Health Foundation or been part of the Q community and the Generation Q project, who were working together but in silos, because that's the way the NHS works, isn't it? And so we felt that it would be a good opportunity to bring us together, which would both, I suppose, strengthen our own relationships at place, but also share our understanding of that developing relationship with people outside nationally from the Q community. We wanted to try and bring people together. We wanted to try and give them space. We wanted to talk to them a little bit about what makes relational relations work. We wanted to introduce some theory burst behind that. So we talked about some theories that might help people embed that. And that's been very powerful learning for me, I have to say, through my learning about leadership in general, is that you need to sort of have the theory in your background to understand what it is that you're doing, to understand what you could do differently, to try something else and explore the way that leadership works. So we talked about appreciative inquiry, learning from mistakes, vulnerability. We had a World Cafe about talking about stories, icebreakers, Appreciative Inquiry thinking environments, run by the 5 of us from Sheffield, who represented both managerial, acute trust, mental health trust, and third sector organisations. So it was a great opportunity for us to get together too.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Helen. Richard, would you like to introduce yourself and the nature of the visits that you hosted?
Yeah, so Richard Hay, I've hosted 3 visits at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. 2 of those are very focused on our general approach to improvement, which brings together change management, project management, and kind of Lean Six Sigma. And then the 3rd, we took a deeper dive into some change methodology, creating contagious commitment. And we worked through that as a tool that we'd use at GSK, and then kind of how applicable it would be to others in terms of in the Q community. I'm now working kind of in 3 NHS trusts. So I work at Guy's and St Thomas's, Buckinghamshire and Portsmouth, taking some of those approaches and helping implement change in those organisations.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose you a question that either of you might want to chip in on, or both of you. And while I'm doing that, if other people could be thinking of any questions they'd like to pose to Helen or Richard, maybe you're less familiar with some of the approaches that they've just described and you want to ask a question about that, or whatever you fancy, just put that question in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat box and putting those questions to Richard and Helen. So the question I've got to kick us off is a reflection I had from both visits, which is around the emphasis on personal change and vulnerability and the link between the two. So if people are going to lead change, the message I got strongly from Richard was that they need to be able and visibly changing themselves, because how can you expect others to change if you can't change yourself? And what I picked up a lot from Sheffield was the power of vulnerability in not having to have all the answers all the time, and be seeing that we're all on a learning journey and how important that is. And I just really wanted to pose to you, if you've seen people who've changed personally and others that maybe haven't changed, what do you think the stir is? What are the differences you're seeing? So what was it that made somebody really change? Or if you've seen somebody that hasn't changed, what do you think the sticking point would be for them? That's my question.
Okay, Peter, I'll take up that challenge and then let Richard have a go. So for me, these things are integrally linked with leadership and the way that you are as an authentic leader and what you bring to a conversation, because it all starts with a conversation, doesn't it? Relational leadership. And for me, the vulnerability issue is about acknowledging that no one of us in any circumstances can be this heroic traditional leader, which is sometimes portrayed, who knows everything and knows what to do. That we learn through dialogue, we develop ideas through dialogue, and that most importantly, we get things wrong. We had one of our sessions, which was around learning from mistakes, where we stood up, all of us, talked about a mistake which we could share. And I recognize that one cannot share in public all mistakes, but this was, something that we could share, which would bring some understanding about our own sense of humility about the fact that we don't always get it right, but also encourage people not to worry too much about getting it wrong, in the context of, if your intentions were good, and if you're open and transparent about what you're doing, that's okay. And if it doesn't work, that's okay too. And you don't need to ask for that permission. We will trust you with it. And I think that was one of the things we were trying to convey with that exercise.
Thank you, Helen. Richard, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so if you think about personal change and vulnerability is the kind of framed question, at the heart of GSK's approach is change starts with self. So there's a set of kind of change principles, and number one is change starts with self. So in terms of, how to help people move forward, is a real good coaching role that the kind of quality improvement, business improvement group kind of took up. There's a whole load of tools that we use to help reinforce that personal accountability was kind of fundamental. So GSK has 10 fundamentals, and one of those is personal accountability. So people are personally responsible for their own improvement. And then we use things like Johari Window to help people open up some of the disclosure piece to kind of show that vulnerability. So again, you had this kind of leader kind of, disclosing what they were doing and mistakes and vulnerability, as well as a coaching role. And the last piece I wanted to say is, at the heart of this is the kind of inverted triangle. So the leaders aren't the experts in the work, the front line are the experts in the work, and the leader's role is then to help.
Okay, thanks very much. I've seen the questions coming in thick and fast. So Richard, could you say a little bit about contagious commitment? Just expand a little bit on what that is.
Yeah, so it's a methodology and framework we use for change. It talks about different levers that you can adjust for the change that you want. So making sure you understand what the change is, making sure you grow advocacy towards your change, making sure you have infrastructure, making sure you listen to resistance. And they're all kind of important things in terms of the change and the levers, as well as being clear in terms of what's the role model leader look like. So what is it a leader needs to do to kind of reinforce and kind of drive the change? And there's a methodology, there's a workshop that we ran for the Q community to help share that methodology.
Yeah, any sort of references you can put in the chat for that, Richard, would be good as well.
Yeah, I'll add those in a minute.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. So we've got a question from Rotany. Is GSK as a process production organisation probably thrives on innovation. What is your experience about innovation in the NHS, and how have you promoted this? Any examples, please?
Yeah, and so the innovation piece is really interesting when you compare it to kind of structured improvement. So one of the spaces that we tried to create was, if you're doing a structured agenda, it's okay to be creative and leave white space within that agenda if you just want some thinking time. So there's a piece around, the structured methodology can help drive some of your innovation. I've not got that close to kind of innovation in the NHS, to be honest. So I might kind of ask Helen if she kind of has got some insights on that piece.
Yeah, I put in the chat, Richard, your reminder about the inverted triangle and the fact that this is not top-down delivered. This needs to come from within us, within all of us, at whatever level we're working, is so important. And that chimes very much with me around some of the ideas in the long-term plan, and integrated health and social care and mental health and physical health, for example, whereby we're really asking communities to work together, and I mean communities both in and outside the health service, to think about redesigning services or inputting into the design of services. That is revolutionary and still incredibly difficult for people. So service integration, I think, is one example where I think that's very relevant. The other one I draw from it is that concept of change starts from self. And as many people will know, we're into a rapid change process around workforce at the moment, rapidly developing workforce, developing new roles, developing people into new roles and into new opportunities. And for me, that just epitomizes the idea of change. The professional roles that many of us have, that have long traditions and very rigid boundaries around them, need to be up for change, and we need to think about how to do that safely and in a way which doesn't alienate people, because it does feel very threatening to people. And that means changing ourselves and our own view about what work is and what work we should be doing as individuals.
And I just wanted to come back on that, the innovation question. So, one of the things that we're doing with teams in the NHS is helping leaders frame what the problems are, and therefore getting the workforce to kind of help solve those problems. So we have a framing and solving kind of cycle. And for lots of the trusts that we work in, we put in kind of improvement huddles. So there's a mechanism for, everyone who works on a ward or in an area or in a service, on a care group, to get together to discuss what their improvements are. And just by creating that kind of space and some infrastructure, you get innovation from everyone.
Thank you. Just one last question. We have time for. Do we need to be more explicit about the relational aspects of meetings, etc., and the conversations that take place and how to get the best from them? And that's a question from Matt Hill.
So I think the answer is yes. The question is how to do that, and something we haven't referenced at all yet, of course, is the pandemic, and what challenges that's provided for us, but what also enormous opportunities that has provided for us. Now, I'm not going to, of course, say that the pandemic is a good thing, absolutely not, but I have to say that it has been an exciting time to be working because of the enormous additional benefits of remote working, of connecting across the country, of connecting in various different ways. And I think there's been a lot of innovation and about how to manage, as Pete and Emma have demonstrated very well today, how to well manage a webinar like this. So I think there's such rich learning to be taken from that. And in that, we need to make sure that we don't forget the importance of you know, the lack, the absence of certain things that we're still all faced with, and what that's doing to us all, which is obviously not good for any of us in the longer term. But how can we do this? How can we take from this as time goes forward and take the benefits that have been through this? I mean, I'd like to call it a sort of democratization, really. You know, no longer do we have, you know, in my trust, do we have higher training meetings, core training meetings, foundation meetings, consultants meetings. We now have doctors meetings. Now, I know that's not revolutionary, but it is actually in the sense of where we are. And there are lots of opportunities to do that in different ways across different networks.
Okay.
Yeah, and as a build on that, in terms of, you know, when people are coming together, whether it's virtually or, you know, physically face to face, you know, focus on how individuals are at their best is always important. So a couple of techniques that we've used routinely are, you know, having meeting roles. So one of those is the observer. So making sure that people are kind of active and participating. And to kind of enable those good conversations, we sometimes check in on people's moods. So again, people, how they're feeling, you can do it numerically or colors or the squirrels that you used earlier, you know. But then the action is, you know, and what would it take to get to the higher level? You know, what is it the team around you can actually do to improve your mood and make you be the best person you can be in this meeting?
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Richard. Time flies, doesn't it? So that's all we've got time for in terms of question and answer. But we've got some time scheduled in now for you to think about what you've heard, to have further conversations, really focusing on sort of the implications on some of what we've been discussing for you. We sort of bridged that into the question, so what, now what? And we've got just under 15 minutes to explore that. So we're going to break up the breakout rooms. We're going to mix them up. So you'll probably be with different people than you were with before. So time to make some connections and reflect on what you've heard. I will see you back shortly, about 15 minutes.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, I'll just let everyone filter back in the room. Okay, I think we've got most people back. Sarah, can you wave at me if you think we've got most people back? Yeah, fantastic. We all learn these new ways of working, aren't we? Wow, time flew fast in our breakout room. I don't know about yours. Because of time, I would suggest that we use the chat now. to share anything that we think we'd like to share from our rooms. And also maybe if anybody wants to say something at this point by putting their hand up, then happy to hear from you for a couple of minutes. Is there anybody who feels that they picked up something that they really like to share with the other people at this point? I'm watching to see if any hands go up. Oh, Rotimi, yes, would you like to?
I think one of the things we discussed in our group that came out was the suggestion that more of our visits should be to centers of excellence. I know that the visits that were chosen have something to offer, but specifically, people wanted to go to areas where excellence is the watchword for future visits. And so that's, I'll leave it as brief as that. There are other things we discussed.
Okay, thanks for that. We certainly had a call in our group to do more visits, so we'll need to bear that more in mind. Any other comments anybody would like to make? Please put your hand up if you have.
Well, I think I'll go again.
Go on then.
David, I think, if I get the name right, he's an engineer. Am I right? Yeah, a retired engineer. And his observation was that there was no process systems in the NHS. And that is one of the areas we have to look at deeply to be able to achieve quality improvement. That you need to know why the process is necessary and what you want to get out of the process. But that is lacking in the NHS. And then the pressure under which we are. For example, if you take maternity, there's the Ockenden report. There's so many reports, and trusts are expected to deliver these reports. All have different themes. And because you have external pressure, the media is looking at you, that everybody's on the edge, and it doesn't bring out the best in people.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I mean, there's quite a few things coming through the chat worth sharing, so do go ahead and share that, and we'll also capture the chat at the end of it. I think there was a lot of talk in our group, certainly, about thinking really carefully about your own development and you in sort of change and improvement, and a couple of reflections as to whether how does this mean for the next phase of the NHS in particular? So what does it mean about, moving on from the pandemic a bit, and how do we do that? And how do we do that in a way in which we're looking after ourselves and thinking about what we might need over time? So I'm going to just finish this off now. So I will share my screen again. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for your input. It's been great, and there's certainly the breakout rooms that I've been in have been absolutely full of great ideas and great suggestions. So just to let you know that we've got 2 more sessions coming up. One of those is on organise, what we call an organise, and the other one is in improvement. So the next session is on the 16th of April, and we'll be looking at the sort of measured approaches that organisations have taken around improvement. What have been the actual practical steps that they've taken? And then in Organise, we're looking at how a whole organisation has come together. What has been the implications for involving everybody in that organisation in coming together in an alignment and being really careful about how they're developing their expertise. And then that links to the comment just made around going to centres of excellence. So we'll bring out some of our learning from some of the centres of excellence we went to, both in the NHS and outside of the NHS, because there are some fabulous things around that people are doing. So just to let you know that they're coming up. All 3 have been designed to stand alone. So if there's one you can't do, don't worry. But it's quite helpful to see all 3 because it does help show how we've built our learning. So what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to launch a poll that Sarah's going to launch for us. We were going to do the after action review right now, but we're going to do it via a poll. So that'll only take a minute or so, and it'll be at the end of this talk. So please stay on just to give us our feedback, because we as well as everyone else really want to make sure we continuously improve and we understand what works and what doesn't work. So all I have to say is thank you very much from myself and from Pete and from Richard and Helen for being such fabulous participants in this webinar. It's been great to see some familiar faces and to see some new Q members. And I really, really hope that we get to see you soon, not just on a screen, but in a face-to-face kind of way would be fantastic. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Sarah now to launch the poll, and hope to see you all again at the next webinar. Okay, thank you.